There's a moment most of us have experienced but couldn't quite explain. Someone is talking to you. Everything they're saying sounds reasonable. The words check out, but something feels off. A flicker of something wrong that you can't name. A small voice somewhere telling you that what you're hearing and what's actually true are two different things. Most people dismiss that feeling. They tell themselves they're being paranoid. They give the benefit of the doubt. They move on. And then later, sometimes days, sometimes years later, they find out they were right the first time. That feeling wasn't paranoia. It was your brain picking up on signals your conscious mind hadn't processed yet. Microsignals, behavioral inconsistencies, the invisible gap between what someone is saying and how their body, voice, and behavior are actually responding to the act of saying it. FBI agents, interrogators, and trained investigators don't rely on gut feeling. They've studied that gap for years. They know exactly what to look for. And the good news is, so can you. Here is how to spot a liar, using the same behavioral principles used by some of the most sophisticated deception detectors in the world. First, understand what lying actually costs. Before you learn how to spot a liar, you need to understand why lying leaves traces in the first place. Lying is expensive, not financially, cognitively. When you tell the truth, you're simply reporting what happened. Your memory and your mouth are running the same program. It's relatively effortless. When you lie, you're doing something far more demanding. You're constructing a version of reality that didn't happen. You're tracking what you've already said to make sure it stays consistent. You're monitoring the other person's reaction to see if they're buying it. You're suppressing the truth, which takes active mental effort. And you're managing your own emotional response to the stress of being potentially caught. That's an enormous cognitive load. And under that kind of pressure, the brain leaks. Not through dramatic tells like in the movies. Nose touching, eyes darting left, sudden sweating. Real behavioral leakage is far more subtle, but it's there. And once you know what you're looking for, it becomes very hard to unsee. 1. Establish a baseline first. This is the step that separates amateurs from professionals, and most people skip it entirely. Before you can identify deceptive behavior, you need to know what a person looks like when they're being honest. Because everyone has quirks. Some people naturally avoid eye contact. Some people touch their face constantly. Some people are slow to answer questions even when they're telling the complete truth. If you don't know what's normal for this specific person, you'll misread everything. FBI interviewers spend the opening portion of any interview asking questions they already know the answers to. Not to gain information, but to observe. They watch how the person breathes, how they hold their body, how quickly they respond, what their natural speech rhythm sounds like. They're building a reference point. Do the same thing in real life. Before you start asking the question you actually care about, spend a few minutes in normal, low-stakes conversation. Watch how they respond when there's nothing on the line. That's your baseline. Any significant deviation from that baseline, not from some imaginary textbook standard, but from this person's normal, is what deserves your attention. 2. Watch for the gap between words and body. The human body is extraordinarily bad at lying. The mouth can be trained. The face can be partially controlled. But the body, the shoulders, the torso, the feet, the hands, tends to keep telling the truth even when everything above the neck is working hard to deceive. This is called nonverbal leakage. And it shows up in patterns. When someone is being honest, their body language tends to align with what they're saying. If they're telling you about something exciting, their energy rises. If they're describing something sad, something in their posture softens. The words and the body are telling the same story. When someone is lying, that alignment breaks down. They might be describing a devastating loss while their body remains oddly neutral. They might claim they're completely fine while their feet are pointed toward the nearest exit. They might say yes while their head gives a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of no. These mismatches are the signal, not any single gesture in isolation, but the pattern of the body telling a different story than the words. Pay particular attention to what investigators call comfort gestures, self-soothing behaviors like neck touching, arm crossing, or rubbing the hands together. Under the stress of deception, the body instinctively tries to calm itself. These gestures spike when the cognitive and emotional load of lying becomes hardest to manage. Usually right at the moment the lie is being told or right after a probing question lands too close to the truth. 3. Listen to the language, not just the content. The words people choose when they're lying tend to follow predictable patterns, not because liars are careless, but because the psychological mechanics of deception shape language in ways the speaker doesn't fully control. Here are the specific things to listen for. Distancing language. Truthful people tend to use direct first-person language when describing their own actions. I did this. I said that. I went there. Liars often unconsciously create distance from the story by depersonalizing it. They shift from I to we or to vague passive constructions. The car was moved. Not, I moved the car. Unnecessary detail. When someone volunteers an unusual amount of detail about something you didn't ask about, especially detail that serves to explain or justify, that's worth noting. Truthful people don't generally feel the need to over-explain. Liars often preemptively defend themselves against accusations that haven't been made yet. If someone tells you without prompting exactly where they were, who they were with, what they ate, and why they got home at that time, ask yourself who they're trying to convince, avoiding the direct denial. This is one of the most reliable signals in the entire field of deception detection. When innocent people are accused of something, their most instinctive response is usually a flat, unambiguous denial. No, that's not true. I didn't do that. Liars frequently avoid that direct construction. Instead, they answer questions with questions. They attack the source of the accusation. They say things like, "Why would I do that?" Or "How could you even think that?" Which sound like denials, but technically aren't. They express outrage at being suspected rather than simply and clearly saying it didn't happen. Notice what's said, and notice what conspicuously isn't. 4. Pay attention to timing and response latency. This one is subtle, but once you notice it, you'll hear it everywhere. In normal conversation, response time is relatively consistent. Someone asks you something, you answer. The rhythm flows naturally. There might be slight pauses for thought on complex questions, but the timing broadly makes sense. When someone is lying, that rhythm changes in specific ways. On questions that should be easy, questions about basic facts they'd know instantly if they were telling the truth, the response sometimes comes with a delay that doesn't make sense. That micro-pause before answering "Where were you last Tuesday?" is the brain searching not for a memory, but for a story. Conversely, sometimes liars answer too quickly, particularly if they've rehearsed. A response that comes out smooth and fast and perfectly formed on a question that should require some genuine recall is its own kind of red flag. Real memories are reconstructed in real time. They come with natural hesitations, corrections, and nonlinear detail. Rehearsed answers don't. Also watch for what happens right after a difficult question. A change of subject, a sudden joke, a counter question, a complaint about the question itself. These deflections serve a function. They create distance between the question and the moment of answering, hoping you'll get pulled along and forget to circle back. Don't circle away. Circle back. 5. Watch the face in the half-second before the response. The human face produces what psychologist Paul Ekman spent decades documenting: micro-expressions. Involuntary flashes of genuine emotion that appear on the face for a fraction of a second before the person's controlled expression takes over. You can't fake what you don't feel. And you can't fully suppress what you do feel. Not in that first half-second window. What you're looking for isn't a specific expression. It's a mismatch, a flicker of something. Fear, contempt, disgust. That doesn't match the emotion being presented a moment later. Someone who claims to be calm but whose face flashes panic in the instant after a pointed question. Someone who expresses sympathy but whose features briefly show something much colder underneath. These flashes are fast. They disappear in under a quarter of a second. You won't catch them every time. And you shouldn't make sweeping judgments based on a single ambiguous expression. But over the course of a conversation, a pattern of emotional mismatch is meaningful data. 6. Ask the question you care about twice, not back to back. That's too obvious, but at two different points in the conversation, approached from different angles. True memories are stable but not identical. When you ask someone to recall a genuine experience at different moments, the core facts stay consistent, but the peripheral details might shift slightly as different aspects of the memory surface. That's normal. That's how real memory works. Fabricated stories tend to behave differently. Either they stay too consistent, word for word identical, as if being read from a script, or they contradict themselves on facts that a truthful person would remember clearly. The inconsistency between two versions of the same account, especially on specific concrete details, is one of the clearest indicators available to an investigator, and it's something you can use in any conversation. Without making it obvious that's what you're doing. A critical warning before you use any of this. None of these signals, taken alone, means someone is lying to you. This is the part that trained investigators emphasize over and over. And it's the part that amateurs almost always ignore. Every single behavior on this list has an innocent explanation. People are nervous for reasons that have nothing to do with deception. People speak in unusual ways. People avoid eye contact because of anxiety, not guilt. People over-explain because they're meticulous, not because they're hiding something. What you're looking for is never one signal. It's a cluster. Multiple behavioral indicators showing up together consistently, specifically around the topic in question, not scattered randomly through the conversation. And even then, even with a clear cluster of signals, what you have is a reason to look more closely, not a verdict, not a certainty, a question worth asking. The FBI doesn't convict people based on behavioral analysis. Neither should you. Use these tools to sharpen your attention, to ask better questions, to notice when something deserves a second look, to trust the part of your brain that was already picking up signals before you had the language for them. Here's what it all comes down to. Liars aren't fundamentally different from honest people. They're the same people, under different pressure, carrying a different cognitive load. And that load, the weight of constructing, maintaining, and defending a false version of reality, leaves marks. In the words, in the body, in the timing, in the face, you've been reading those marks your whole life. You just didn't have the framework to interpret them clearly. Now you do. Pay attention. Listen for what's missing. Watch for what doesn't quite match. And trust that quiet, persistent, nagging feeling that something is off. Because more often than not, it's not paranoia. It's pattern recognition. And pattern recognition, trained and sharpened over time, is one of the most powerful things a person can develop.